Hey, Erica, welcome back to the pod.
Hey, Holly, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I know it's so good to see you. For those of you who are listening, Erica is also based in New Hampshire, and she is a team dietitian here at Holly Fueled Nutrition, and she's got a lot of specialties. So you're board certified in sports nutrition and also diabetes education. So I'm super excited to have you on the show to talk about kind of the intersection, honestly, of like those two specialties, which is kind of like body composition related goals when you're a really athletically driven person and with a touch of maybe like GLP-1 medications and that type of stuff too that I know can overlap in the weight loss and blood sugar um, kind of topics. But yeah, thanks for coming on the show to try and cover this beast with me.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, let's jump right in. Let's kind of I guess at first like just kind of describe the difference between like when we're talking about body composition or fat loss focused nutrition versus like performance nutrition, because a lot of the times I think the public is made to believe these things are the same. Like fitness has a look, and if you're fit, it means like you're eating a certain way. But we know as dietitians that that's not true. Sometimes these things are almost like opposing of each other. So yeah, can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when people, and I think it's really exciting when people are excited to get involved in running and training for an event, however small or however big. And when that happens, it is important to kind of shift the priorities, especially as you're ramping up in terms of training and intensity. And when you're focusing on body composition changes, you're kind of focusing on more of like a deficit in terms of like your overall intake. But when you're focusing on performance, you're more prioritizing fueling and making sure that you can optimize that performance with your run so that you can do your best and feel your best overall. So yeah.
Yeah, with performance, I think it's always a fine line of like, okay, we need to make sure we're eating enough to support what we're trying to ask our bodies to do so we're not depleted. And then body composition and weight loss is almost like we're a bit depleting on purpose, like with some
Right.
strategy
Right.
to try and prevent any, of like the risks that can come with that. I think too, like, in our sports nutrition world, there's a lot of focus around low energy availability and relative energy deficiency in sports syndrome because it's so prevalent, especially in the endurance community. And in part because eating disorders are prevalent, but also it's just hard to eat enough, like when your energy needs are really high. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the focus on that is really important because, we see it all the time in practice. And a lot of the times too, like some of the outcomes of this can affect body composition in the form of like inability to gain muscle mass, or it can be weight loss, it can be fat gain, kind of the system and metabolism slowing down to compensate for not getting enough food over time. So there really is a fine line between like ending up like in that situation, which is what we don't want, versus kind of like, okay, I would like to work on body composition intentionally without a lot of those long-term risks catching up with me. To kind
Right.
of like cover this too, I know there's a lot of old school thinking that's still around in the industry, especially in running, that like lighter or smaller equals faster. Can you talk a little bit about the nuance of that and why that's not necessarily always true?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, like, oh, do I need to lose weight in order to perform better? And it is kind of nuanced because I
Mhm.
feel like when people are trying to intentionally lose weight, they go full bore, right? They're trying to like maximize that loss at that time. And when that happens and we're going too heavy into it, that can certainly lead to that low energy availability. And so when that's the case, and if it is too intense, then that can certainly impact your performance. And it's not necessarily going to help you to be faster because you're not meeting your energy needs overall. And so it's like a really fine line to kind of tote in terms of that. There are some research studies that can say that lighter body weight can generally result in faster running performance for endurance events. But
Mhm.
because of that nuance, it really isn't, in my opinion, a recommendation of mine to make that a focus because I want people to prioritize and focus on making sure they're getting enough. And most people aren't getting enough when it comes to training, or even in like the off season too. Like sometimes they're still engaging in activity, and so it kind of like, again, it's very individualized in terms of how that person is, like what their background is, what's their genetics, what's their focus. So there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah, very well said. And like the research even too that exists, like you and I both, read research for a living,
Mm-hmm.
and apply it to actual people. Like a lot of it is like, let's look at some times and weights and like correlate them. And it doesn't take into account, okay, what's the rest of the individual's health status like? Did they get
Right.
injured after that race? How's their mental health? Do they have an eating disorder?
Yep.
Are they like deficient in vitamins? Like how are they doing? And like how are they doing in 5 years in the sport too?
Exactly.
Like we just don't really have the same data showing up in those types of studies or many of those types of studies, but we do have studies like I know one that you and dove into amazingly in my our newsletter that goes out via email was on like even just Boston Marathon participants showing that if they're underfueled or kind of like it seemed like they weren't reporting eating enough in training, they were more likely to have medical events happen during the marathon. So
Right.
like for every study that's like, hey, lighter might result in faster times, there's a lot of other, like you said, nuance to that to kind of say, well,
Right. Right.
yes,
Right.
but at what cost? And also sometimes just no. So I
Yes.
think people can understand that. I think they're starting to wrap their heads around that. And then I know what I hear about a lot from athletes is like, well, I just feel like the weight I'm at right now isn't good for me, or don't feel my best or my healthiest. And I think there's a lot of nuance about this topic as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like set point theory,
Hmm.
kind of like finding that weight range that seems good for your body given the environment it's in, the stimulus you're giving it. Like how do you kind of have that conversation with people when they do want to talk about weight and body composition? And I know you tend to approach things, like I do, where you're talking about health as a whole, but how do you kind of help people understand yeah, like what weight range might be healthy for them when they kind of bring it up?
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, this comes up a lot too, just in terms of, what are their overall goals? Are they realistic? Have they been at this for a while in terms of trying to attain something? And that's part of it too, is, sometimes we're running the hamster wheel all the time, burning our bodies out, and we're not getting anywhere. And there's so many things that are going on with that. So yeah, the theory suggests that the body actively resists deviations from the set point, which is thought to be encoded in the brain, so that via hypothalamic pathways and influenced by the genetics, environment, lifespan changes. But after the weight loss, sometimes hormonal and metabolic adaptations, like reduced resting metabolic rate and increased hunger, actually promote weight regain. So it reflects that the body's drive wants to return to that set point. And so sometimes, despite our efforts, like our body's always trying to get to that certain point. So that can actually connect to trying to aim for body neutrality, right? Trying to aim for that as a goal, like being neutral with the weight, and maybe focusing on those behaviors that help promote health instead. Because despite chasing that number that's in your head that you want to get to, those health behaviors is behaviors that you're aiming for that can be sustainable for the rest of your life. Is going to help you get to your weight that your body could be, I think should, but that your body is going to be optimal at, that it's going to work best for you. You're going to feel your best. You're not going to have all these symptoms that can show that maybe you're not doing the best thing for yourself by chasing that number.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard this like kind of I don't know if metaphors. I'm not an English major, so don't come for me, but it might be a metaphor. But I've heard this analogy, I guess, a couple times, and I hate comparing people to dogs, but in the analogy, it's like there's a lot of different breeds of dogs. So like if we're constantly trying to make a Saint Bernard look like a Chihuahua, like
Yep.
what are we doing? Like
Yeah.
they're both meant to exist in the world, and a Saint
Yep.
Bernard is never going to be a Chihuahua, and a Chihuahua is never going to be a Saint Bernard. Um, so I think just kind of alluding to that, kind of set point weight range, sometimes what it is not in alignment with what you would like to see in the mirror or what you think it should be, or what maybe if you do have an eating disorder or disordered eating or body image dysmorphia, maybe it doesn't align with what that part of your brain wants it to look like, which by the way, that part of your brain is probably never going to be satisfied, no matter what
Right.
you do. But I think that can be really difficult because society, we do tend to accept a certain body type more than others. And I do think that's that could be a whole podcast episode, within itself that, we could probably cover for hours. But I do think it's
Totally.
important. Yeah, when we're talking about body composition, that's kind of what we're talking about. We're talking about body composition changes within what's probably a good set point for you. And that might be a smaller body and it might be a larger body. There's kind of like no way to know for sure, essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much that goes into it. And that's why, each person is a different strategy.
Yeah. I also think it's important too, just from I am someone who, like I switched sports. Like I was riding horses competitively for, 2 decades. And then I switched sports into running for probably about a decade now. And like my body comp is different. Like my clothing size is very different than it once was. I was always going to be someone who was like a smaller person. That's just kind of my genetic makeup. But like I have switched sports before and therefore kind of like switched the chronic stimulus that my body's receiving from training and experienced a change in body composition. And I know for some people, they can probably relate to that. And for others, maybe not so much. So I also think, if you're here and you're like, okay, I'm a runner and I want to make running my main goal and my main sport and my main priority, I do think there's kind of like an expectation like, okay, our body's probably not going to like change extremely dramatically if we're just going to keep doing the exact same stimulus too, compared to if you started like powerlifting or, doing a completely different type of sport.
Very true. Yeah, kind of changing things up a little bit can give your body something different to kind of look at and to work with, and kind of like work different muscle groups. Like, when you do strength training for the first time, like you notice like after a couple of days, you're feeling a little sore in some areas because if you're a runner, like you're used to
It's
running
new.
certain muscle groups. And so, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
And
like if I get on a horse now, like muscle memory kicks in and I'm like riding this horse like I
mm-hmm,
did for 2 decades, but my muscles have not done that in a long time. So I
mm-hmm,
can do it, but then I'm sore for like a week.
right, right.
Because it's like we don't do that a lot right now, and our
mm-hmm,
body is not really like super specialized in this right now. Um,
right.
so yeah, I always like to bring that up too. So kind of like given the discussion around, yeah, figuring out what your set point is that's good for you, that may or may not be what you prefer, but what might be healthy for you. I know a lot of people will kind of look up or tell me that we've learned to like about ideal body weight, like equations. And I think something that's interesting is a lot of sports nutrition recommendations are like grams per kilogram of body weight when it comes to carbohydrates or protein or, calories and that type of thing. And a lot of people will tell me, well, is that, valid if I'm in a body that I think is larger than it could be or should be? In a body that, is higher in body fat percentage than maybe the people they were studying in the research studies. And I think, again, this conversation deserves a lot of nuance. So how do you kind of approach that topic too? And I know we both try to always like individualize things to people in practice.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I feel like when we were in school, like learning about dietetics, like ideal body weight, BMI, like you have to learn about it, you have to know about it. But and it's good to know, right? But in practice,
Yeah.
that doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of situations because it's not the best measure for overall health. And especially for athletes, who have like higher muscle mass, and that doesn't really correlate with what health looks like in the big picture. In terms of like bigger bodies, again, like if you're an athlete, like you maybe have more body fat, but you also may have more muscle mass. So it really doesn't take into account the full picture. It's a crude measurement, and so it doesn't really distinguish between fat mass and lean mass, and can misclassify people in terms of what they're looking at. And so it can lead to inappropriate goal setting and potential health risks when we're relying on those measurements alone. So yeah,
Yeah.
it can be tricky.
Yeah, I know. It's like taking a driving test on paper and then going behind the wheel. Totally different.
Yeah,
Totally
yeah,
different. It's kind of how
absolutely. In
dietetics
practice,
school
yeah.
felt sometimes. It's like, oh, this is not applying perfectly in a black and white way. Um,
hmm
yeah. So kind of given all of this, if someone's like, okay, great, I do want to work on body composition, like when is a good time given the differences between performance nutrition and body comp kind of weight loss focused nutrition, when's a good time for a runner who's used to like training for a marathon in the fall, a marathon in the spring? Like when's a good time for them to do that, and how might they need to reevaluate like their training periodization in order to, yeah, kind of not end up with those kind of extra risks that can come with being in a calorie deficit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you're training for something, especially a marathon, you really don't want to be focusing on body composition changes. So that's really something that you want to do in the off season, like when are kind of finishing up, you have some time to focus on that if that's something that's a goal of yours. So it should really be in the off season because that's where you can really hit into relative energy deficiency and low energy availability. And so they may be in between those time periods of the spring and the fall if there is enough of a gap. Again, if you're active and you remain that activity, which you should be taking a break, it probably isn't recommended to do all of that in 1 year. Give your body some time to recuperate and cover so you can do your best in terms of your training. That I think that overall is going to be a benefit for you. And then when you do have some downtime, you can plan for that. And then you can say, okay, I'm going to prioritize this now. So it's like switching gears, from one into the other. It's hard. You can't do both at the same time and expect good results and expect to feel good overall. It just leads to issues overall.
Louder, louder.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it's true though. I think a lot of athletes, like, I don't know if it's because of expectations in our own heads or like what we see people doing, like on social media, influencers, they're like, okay, I can run a marathon in the fall and PR, and then I can lose like 20 pounds in 6 weeks in the off season, big quotes. That's not an off season. And then I can train for another marathon in the spring because like I wanted to qualify for Boston and then I did. So I'm training for a marathon in the spring and and like get a PR and have nothing bad happen to me. Like that is so unrealistic. And I know that's what a lot of people think they can do in their heads. And I would argue too, like doing a lot of races like that constantly, especially training like to your capacity, given like life stressors and everything else going on in your life, like really the recreational athlete, I mean, who's really serious about like running, like they train really hard. Like I know
Mhm.
when I talk to elite
Intense.
athletes, they're like, that is harder. Like it is harder to do that and have
Mhm.
kids and a family and work and to go to school or whatever it is you're doing full time and then like run around that and then just like not recover. That's crazy. But we do it. And it's really probably going to set you up for those risk factors that we're talking about, where it's hard to not be in low energy availability if that is the schedule that you're trying to maintain. And Eric and I are both arguing like you need to not be in that state in order to then go start pursuing body comp goals. It's really important to like replete you first. Would you agree?
Absolutely, 100%. Like again, louder for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes time to do that. Like there's not a good like I can take out my crystal ball and predict how like long this is going to take for you to like
Mhm.
come out of, especially if it truly is relative energy deficiency and sport syndrome, which typically low energy availability, if you've been in that for at least 3 months, that is considered long-term chronic and you're probably flirting with reds. And I know a lot of people listening to this are probably like 3 months, like this has been happening for years. So it's something that, yeah, it's gonna take some time to come out of. And sometimes the body comp changes that can come as a result of those like risk factors are confusing because you're like, well, I do want to work on body comp because now I've got, these body comp changes because I've been under fueled for so long and my body's so stressed out that like I don't really know where to start. And what we're saying is you need to start by kind of letting go of the body comp goals in order to maybe get the body comp goals in the future. Like we need to focus on repleting you and measuring those other components of health first to make sure everything is kind of looking safe and good and supported before we go and put you in a calorie deficit because yeah, that's going to be kind of stressful on the body.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, what about this is a question I get a lot. I'm sure you do too. Like, what about if an athlete is like, okay, but I'm in an off season because I'm injured and I'm afraid to gain weight because I'm not exercising as much? Is now a good time to focus on body comp? Like, what do you kind of contribute to that conversation?
Yeah, yeah. So some people, yeah, stress fractures from training and could have been from underfueling. And so when you have an injury, it's not a time for calorie deficit either. It's time to make sure you're getting adequacy, getting enough so that it can support healing so you can get back to the thing that you love to do. So really, those times aren't good times either. So it's just making sure that you're getting enough. So, I mean, I know we've repeated this a number of times, but adequacy, getting enough for what your training level is going to be really important to supporting your overall goals if you want to feel good and do well as a runner or any sport for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Because, yeah, a lot of the times too, like an injury could have happened because of, yeah, there's like a compensation issue around like energy
Mm-hmm.
availability. Like maybe you were a little underfueled, under recovered, and now we tip the scales and we're injured. And that's especially if it's like a bone injury or you had surgery
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. Like it's not
Totally.
time. Like if anything, we want to be throwing more food at the wall to
Right.
kind of help us heal. And that's a really good time to focus on that and like working, even maybe with a sports dietitian to help see like maybe like why did this happen and can we prevent that from happening in the future, along
Mm-hmm.
with the healing process, of course. So say someone's like, all right, I'm coming about this in a healthy way. Like I understand set point, is a range that may or may not be in alignment with what I want, but I kind of want to work on body comp. I don't think I've been like in a hole, energy availability wise. I don't think I'm dealing with reds. You know, I think I'm ready to pursue like weight loss. How, like, what nutrition focuses do you kind of help people focus on? Because again, we know weight's not a habit, but the nutrition habits are. So, what habits do you kind of start to have people work on when they're in that situation?
Yeah, so overall, trying to get nutrient density, adequate protein to make sure we're replenishing, repairing our muscles. Balance is key. Carbs support training energy and recovery demands. So consistency is key. And the focus on in terms of like weight management, we talk about the different macronutrients. We talk about overall intake, like what are your overall needs. So typically, safe and effective weight management is going to be around like half a pound, up to 2 pounds. But honestly, I feel like 2 pounds is a little too much too. I would say half a pound to a pound per week if they're going to aim for something. Because again, like people are still active. And so unless like they're completely just focusing on competition goals, I don't recommend above that for people who are active and engaged. More severe calorie restriction can compromise muscle mass, micronutrient status, and performance. So want to avoid that for sure. So that might be around like 250 to 500 calories per day. And you can kind of look at it as weekly perspective too, in terms of that. And that's something that can support that rate. And that's a safe rate that can help with maintaining that muscle mass. So prioritizing that protein intake can really help with making sure we can hold on to that muscle and we're not losing that, which can hinder your performance. So yeah, macronutrient intake for protein, typically for people who are trying to aim for competition changes, it's higher because you want to preserve that muscle mass. So I have said between 1.5 to 2, but recent research shows higher even. So like 1.6 to 2.4 grams per kilogram per
Oh,
day
wow.
to preserve energy demands and glycogen stores. And then fat intake shouldn't be restricted. 20 to 35% of total energy helps with maintaining hormone balance and keeping you going. Excessive restriction offers no performance benefit and also may impair health. And micronutrient sufficiency should be ensured too. So especially when calories of food groups are less overall. So if they're not getting enough from their foods, like how can we make sure we're meeting our micronutrient needs too? So, talking about things like, okay, how much are you getting? Are we getting enough of what our needs are? What's your plate looking like? The different kind of fueling plates. So talking about that in terms of, okay, are we kind of more in like a 30-minute per day range? That plate's going to look different than if you're in like a 60-minute per day range, or and once you are ramping it up more, that plate's going to look different too. So that can help with kind of portion sizes in that way, using anatomical references like to talk about, so people don't have to rely solely on like I don't
Measuring
get into measuring foods too much because I feel like that's unrealistic to do all the time and not sustainable long term. People don't really want to carry around a food scale or do that all the time.
Yeah.
And so, talking about like how can we increase fruits and veggies during this time? Oftentimes when we're in training, Some people are sensitive to fiber, and some people are adapted to it over time and they can tolerate that more. But how can we increase that in the off period to make sure we're getting enough micronutrients to prevent us from getting sick as often? Because that's one of the risks too, is if we're not getting enough fuel, we get sick more often. And this time of year in the winter, sometimes it can be an off season that goes hand in hand, and viruses can be
Yeah,
unavoidable, but that can
so
help
true.
prevent that from happening too.
Yeah, I
And
love that
not
you
skipping meals either. Oop, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that you brought up the plates because I think we can talk about numbers, and I think some people can like use that as a tool short term to have it
Mhm.
truly be a teaching tool and then can kind of wean off of it and use more realistic means like the
Mhm.
plates or visuals. I love using those things too. And I would argue, like, when we're talking about the plates, if you haven't been around long enough to see like my posts and everything on this, but we're talking about like easy day training plate where you're like under 30 minutes of activity a day, half the plate's vegetables, quarters protein, quarters carbohydrates, and then moderate day training plates like 30 to 60 minutes ish of training a day. And basically everything's in thirds, carbs, veggies, protein. So like our carbs and protein go up a little bit, our veggies go down a little bit because our energy needs are going up. And the hard plate, half is carbohydrates because that's most important for hard training when we're 60, 90 minutes plus of training per day, a quarter vegetables, if at all, and then a quarter protein. And I would argue too, like if we are in truly like a body composition, like kind of weight loss focused phase, like we shouldn't be training more than an hour a day, if that at all. Like your body needs to feel safe. It's going to be hard for most people to eat enough um, and meet like their micronutrient needs like when they're training an hour plus per day. So like we're probably talking about easy day training plates and easy day training schedule during this phase. And a lot of runners don't like that. They don't like to kind of back off training. So again, this is kind of about having that conversation with yourself of, okay, what really are my priorities here? And is this kind of going to be good for me? And that's kind of up to you to make decision wise yourself and also with any healthcare provider you're working with. So I just wanted to throw in that caveat too if people hadn't seen the visuals.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought that up because it is good to know. And I feel like it is one of like the more valuable tools that people could use in their day-to-day life. And easy to remember too. Like I'm very visual too. So I can
Same.
always remember those. I even think about with my kids, like, oh, what food groups do I need to include here for their lunches? And it helps me remember that. So applying that definitely helps for not just yourself, but for others too.
Yeah. And I know you said not skipping meals, like kind of
Yep.
focusing on normal eating patterns. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's also super important.
Yeah, yeah. So people think like, oh, I'm in the off season, I'm not going to prioritize fueling as much. And sometimes like life gets busy and meals get extended or meal skipping can happen because you're going longer periods of time without eating. I consider skipping like going longer than 5 or 6 hours without eating. Because then your body's going to be like, hey, like I haven't been in bed in a while. I'm hungry. And so sometimes that leads to wanting to overdo it later, right? And so you're trying to compensate. Again, not a bad thing. It's your body trying to protect you, and that's a good thing. But sometimes that can happen when meal skipping and you're not getting enough overall, which can lead to a lot of those risks that come with low energy availability. And so still making sure you're getting enough so that your body's getting what it needs and it's not asking for it in other ways that may not be helpful for you in that time.
Yeah. And it contributes to kind of like it feeling safe. Like, oh, I'm getting
Right?
fed every few hours. I'm getting fed
Exactly.
when they wake up. My blood sugar's stable.
Yep.
Eating the balanced plate method that we were talking about can kind of really help with blood sugar stability, which is going to help you
Mhm.
in so many ways. Like even if diabetes isn't even on your radar, you should still care about blood sugar stability.
Totally.
If you want to like feel good, have energy, and be a happy human. But yeah, I love that. I think those like kind of normal eating patterns are still super important. I talk about these a lot more in a previous podcast episode. That's its own thing because again, I feel like a lot of these individual questions I'm asking you could be like an entire podcast episode within themselves. So I'll link the one I'm talking about below if people want to check that out on just like what normal eating patterns look like. And this is going to benefit you in like more of an off season or like body composition phase and also in like a training season phase. It's just the what you're eating at the actual like meals will look a little bit different. Um so I mean we talked about this a little bit before, But in terms of timeline, like how long should someone kind of pursue weight loss for? Like, is there a time frame? Are there kind of like individual kind of red flags or kind of feedback from your body where you kind of say, okay, maybe it's time for me to kind of get back up to more of like maintenance eating, or I went over the edge and I need to kind of rein it in? Like, how do you approach that with people?
Yeah. I think that, definitely for runners, it should be periodized and not pursued year round. Because if you're chronically trying to chase like weight or fat loss efforts, especially during training periods, it can significantly increase that risk of having low energy availability. And so, if you're in that period of aiming for body composition, it could be short term. You want to make sure you can incorporate maintenance breaks, especially for your mental health if needed, and especially if you're showing signs of low energy availability. And so I'd say like a few weeks to a couple of months. Some research says like up to 6 months, but again, for runners, I don't feel like it should be extended to too long of a degree. And there should be breaks, especially if you're planning on multiple events throughout the year, whether they be, shorter races or longer races like a marathon. And so, yeah, I think that time period is individualized to the person in terms of what their goals are as well. But I feel like, trying to make sure that you're being safe about it and you're not going for extended periods of time where it's stressing your body out is important.
Yeah. And like 6 months too, like that's the type of thing where it's like, all right, at that point, we're really changing the way we're training, like for a long period of time.
Right.
Like we are not
Right.
focused on races. We're not focused on doing anything over an hour long, like at any intensity. Like we're really kind of focused on this, and that's fine. You can do that, but you got to kind of like have the right expectations when it comes
Mhm.
to what type of training you're doing and how you're stressing your body outside of how you might be stressing it, from a nutrition standpoint or in life in general. So I agree. I tend to say like for most people, it's like a couple weeks, and then you kind of gotta switch gears if you've got other
Mhm.
performance goals on the calendar. And that goes by really fast. So I feel
It
like
does.
sometimes people are like, oh, wait, that's it. But like I lost 3 pounds. And I'm like, yep, that's it. Now you have a marathon on the calendar. So like we gotta
Mhm.
switch gears here or you're gonna regret it. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it is, I think, about adjusting your expectations, as well when it comes to that. So I mean, aside from nutrition, there's a lot of other medical tools, out there to support weight loss. We've got medications. GLP-1 medications are kind of on the rise right now, even though they've been around for a long time. They're very much being marketed everywhere right now. There's other medications as well. Weight loss surgery. I know we've both kind
Mhm.
of worked in these industries separately from where we're at
Mhm.
now, in addition to bringing that knowledge to the table. So there's a lot of other tools out there. I mean, again, I have a whole podcast episode on like bariatric surgery and also on like weight loss. So I'll link those in the show notes as well. You don't need to like go over everything, but can you kind of talk at least about if someone is interested in using these things, like why everything we already talked about nutrition wise is still super important because of how the medication, especially GLP-1 medications work? So I know you have a lot of experience here.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I'm talking to people who are kind of like contemplating going on GLP-1s, I always try to, dive into a little bit deeper into like, what is the why? So what is the why you want to take a GLP-1? Like, what's your history? Like, what have you been working on? And if they are a new person, like, are they actively engaged in, being active and training for events and things like that? Because that's going to play a role in terms of like how GLP-1 is going to affect certain things, what their side effects might be. But typically, well, when they do decide to go on it, we talk about well, lifestyle changes are still really super important to kind of go along with it because with GLP-1s or other anti-obesity medications, especially after the initial post-operative period for bariatric surgery too, that weight regain is common. And so, the clinical trials, real world data consistently show that without continued nutrition and lifestyle support, most individuals will regain a substantial portion of lost weight after stopping the medication or surgery-induced weight loss plateaus. And so I make that apparent when we first start talking so that they understand that it is really important that we need to get to the root cause of why they wanted to get to take it in the first place, what their history's been, what has caused, if there has been weight gain in the past, what's caused that. And most of the time it's behavioral. And so they need a good team of support that can help them along that journey to keep them accountable so that they're not having low energy availability, so that it is supporting them in their journey, if that's a tool in the toolbox that will be supportive for them and safe for them.
Yeah. It's so like because of how the medications work, like it's almost more important to make sure you're working with a dietitian to
Mm-hmm.
prevent the risks that can come with how the medication works, which is essentially, yeah, it can really, really blunt appetite in people. And I don't know, like I'm sure there'll be research on this in the future. Maybe you know if there already is, but I feel like some people have to just be more susceptible and hit harder by that than others. Like kind of like bariatric surgery too. Some people I know feel, like they can eat totally normal volumes pretty quickly after surgery, and others are like, no, I can't eat normal volumes of food at all. Like I'm so
Right.
restricted. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's got to be similar with this, and I don't know what the research will find, but if your appetite is, say, it's gone, you have to understand how to eat out of self-care. What do normal eating patterns look like? How
Right.
do you build balanced plates? How do we keep your blood sugar stable? Because the medication's not a magic bullet. Like it's not going to fix everything or totally rewire all physiological processes. It's not going to prevent micronutrient deficiencies, thyroid issues,
Right.
stress fractures, which is what I see
Mm-hmm.
a lot in clients taking them and trying to train really hard. So it's definitely, I think, even more important to make sure you're focusing on your nutrition. And it can be a great tool. Like I do see them work really well for people, but I do think again the expectations have to be there.
100%. Yeah. And also another big one too is there can be muscle and bone loss,
Yeah.
along with the adverse effects. So, maintaining that muscle mass becomes pivotal, with that. And sometimes that's one of the first things that can be impacted in addition to some of those symptoms and side effects that you might see. So, although it can be really helpful for some people, it can certainly throw a wrench in things too.
Yeah. 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 So all decisions to make like with your team and make sure you've got some support on board. Because I know it's really intriguing to a lot of people because they're just really popular right now. So I think just bringing some, yeah, like nuance and just like level expectations to the conversation is really important. Um, so I know we kind of talked about some red flags and a little bit about like when to kind of stop pursuing weight loss. I think too, just spending a couple minutes on, yeah, like the mental health aspect. I know you mentioned too, like why weight gain can happen in the first place. I know with GLP-1 conversation, a lot of people are talking about food noise and like it really quiets down the food noise. And I know with like eating disorders too, there can be a lot of food noise and there can be a lot of body image noise. Kind of unprompted intrusive thoughts or just like rumination thought spirals about like these types of topics going on for someone. Can you talk a little bit about like I guess like how as a dietitian we kind of can support that process because I know from my perspective it does often tie back to teaching people how to eat in a way that supports their blood sugar and supports their energy needs.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, we're not therapists per se, but
Yeah.
anything that has to deal with food, we can certainly talk about how does food play a role in their day? How does it impact them? How much of their day are they thinking about food? And is that playing a role in terms of like their overall day? Is it kind of like that goes into like under fueling too? Is sometimes if we're under fueling, those thoughts about food increase and that rumination increases. So that can be a sign that we're not getting enough. And so when people talk about that, in terms of like, mental health, we dive into that a little bit more. Well, can we address and make sure we're eating frequently enough to support our needs? Are we getting at least 3 meals and maybe 3 snacks per day, especially if you're active, maybe more. And so sometimes they can go hand in hand and impact our mood for sure. So if we're not getting enough, we can become, more irritable. It affects our mood. We can become more anxious, even have depressive symptoms. We have to become more dissatisfied with the body potentially. So there's a lot of psychological conflict going on. And sometimes you deny those consequences from happening. And so having a team of not only dietitians who deal primarily with food, but a therapist who is also informed on the food side of things too, can be a huge benefit. And I've seen it happen in real time that it just really makes so many vast improvements for people in their psyche and their day-to-day life, and just like the satisfaction of living and fueling.
Yeah, I think I know we're not therapists and like I need to ask like a therapist this question, but when I've talked to therapists like offline in the past, it kind of sounds a lot like the conversation around like mental health medications, SSRIs, that type of thing. It's like they're great, they're awesome tools, especially research shows when used with therapy and therapeutic interventions. And it's kind of similar with GLP-1 medications. They're great tools, and especially when they're used with therapy and mental health, like,
Right.
support, and also nutrition support and understanding how to eat properly. Because I think a lot of people maybe have been taught like how to diet or how to follow different diets, but not how to eat normally in a way that supports their body. So I think, yeah, there's room for all at the table. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that to the conversation too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah. Um, Amazing. Well, yeah, thanks so much for kind of chatting through some of this with me. I know you're such a great resource for sports nutrition and like performance nutrition, and then also like on kind of this topic too. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you feel like you want to shout out to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think just making sure, I know we didn't dive into this aspect too, but I feel like hydration plays a huge role in us as runners and support through the winter season as well, which is kind of what we're getting into right now. When it's cold, we in the summertime when it's hot, we're sweating, we're thinking about drinking, right?
Yeah.
But when it's cold in the winter, like sometimes we forget about that. So not only getting enough, like getting your appropriate fuel for what your needs are, but also making sure that we're hydrating, we're suiting the whole person. We're getting enough sleep. We're kind of looking at all the aspects of ourselves. So it's not all about nutrition per se. There's so much that goes into our day to day and our overall goals that can just help with optimizing our overall well being.
Yeah, yeah, those pillars are definitely super important, whether it's for performance or body comp
Mm-hmm.
expectations too, especially sleep, which we all know as parents can be hard to come by sometimes.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Um, yeah, but no, thank you so much for bringing that up. And yeah, if you guys, if you need more support, this kind of, brought some light bulb moments to your thought process and you think you want more support, I'll link more info on how to work with Erika in the show notes. You can go check that out since she is taking one-on-one clients.
I'd be happy to see you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It was good to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you too. Thanks so much, Holly.